Forget everything you think about the beach. In the Victorian era, having a tan was something for manual laborers and a sign of poverty. The elite went to the coast not to relax, but because doctors prescribed sea baths as medicine. The salty air supposedly cured everything from tuberculosis to hysteria, and there were rules for everything. Men and women couldn't even swim together. Want to know what it was really like? Then watch until the end. Subscribe to the channel if you're into content like this. In 19th century England, doctors prescribed sea bathing as a remedy. That's right, salt water was considered a treatment for nervous problems and weakness. Victorians took it so seriously that they built those wheeled beach huts you see in the photo. The bather would go in fully dressed, the cart would be pulled out into the sea, and the person would step straight into the water without anyone seeing them. Privacy was an obsession back then. The craziest part? There were workers called dippers, who literally shoved people underwater because a lot of them didn't know how to swim. The railways turned this rich people's ritual into popular fun, creating the first crowded beaches in history. Before 1850, English beaches like Brighton were exclusive territory for the rich. But when the railways started offering cheap tickets, everything changed. Suddenly, factory workers from Manchester could take their families to see the sea for the first time in their lives. Blackpool went from a quiet little village to a mass destination, welcoming thousands of visitors on holidays. It was a quiet revolution that democratized leisure and created the modern concept of the summer vacation we know today. Men and women weren't allowed to use the same beach at the same time. It sounds crazy, but it was the law in many places in England. Authorities split the coastline into separate sections, sometimes miles apart, all to keep a man from seeing a woman in a swimsuit. Anyone who broke the rule could be fined or even arrested. Some towns went further. They set different hours for each sex to go into the water. Inspectors patrolled the sand to make sure no one peeked into the opposite section. It was only at the end of the 19th century that the rules started to loosen up, when wealthy families demanded mixed beaches for their outings. In the Victorian era, going to the beach was a military operation. Women couldn't just walk into the water. First, they'd step into a wooden changing cabin on wheels called a bathing machine. A horse would pull the contraption out into the sea. Inside, she'd change clothes. When the door opened, she was already in the water, far from the eyes of the men on the sand. Some beaches had employees called dippers, who would literally shove bathers underwater. The strangest part? Men and women used separate areas of the beach, sometimes divided by fences. Anyone caught peeking at the women's side had to pay a fine. All that ritual for a simple dip in the ocean that today we do without thinking twice. Queen Victoria would go into the sea using a private wheeled bathing cabin at Osborne House. An assistant called a dipper would push the structure into the water and help the monarch get into the sea without anyone seeing her. It was the kind of luxury and privacy that only royalty could have at the time. Until 1850, men went into the ocean pretty much naked, and nobody complained. After that, they started wearing wool swimsuits that clung to the body. Uncomfortable? Definitely. But at least they had a choice. Women? Whole different story. Women's swimwear could weigh up to 14 kilos when it was wet. And even then, Victorian society demanded that they use bathing machines, wheeled cabins that hid them from the public. The most ironic part, the same men who made these rules hung out at swimming clubs where they swam completely naked. The morality of the time had a double standard, literally. Now Victorian England, going to the beach was almost a ritual of suffering for women. The swimsuits of the time were made of wool or flannel, fabrics that soaked up water like sponges. We're talking about knee-length tunics with long pants underneath. But here comes the insane part. Seamstresses would sew lead weights into the hems to make sure the skirt wouldn't ride up and show their legs. The result? An outfit that could weigh more than 10 kilos when wet. In rough seas, these women would simply sink. Records show cases of drownings directly linked to these outfits. Fashion, literally, killed. In the Victorian era, having a tan was seen as something only poor people had. It might sound strange today, but in 19th century England, pale skin was a sign of status. If your skin was darkened by the sun, you were seen as a manual laborer, someone doing hard work in the fields and on farms. The elite did everything they could to avoid any sign of sun exposure. Women wore huge hats, long gloves, and carried parasols even to the beach. Long sleeves were a must, even in the summer. This obsession only changed in the 20th century when Coco Chanel came back tanned after a vacation in the Mediterranean. Overnight, golden skin became fashionable among the wealthy. What once meant poverty came to represent free time and luxury travel. Doctors used to prescribe quick dips in the icy North Sea as a treatment for nervousness and weakness. The bather would go into the water, jump over a few waves, and come out within a few minutes. Lying out to get a tan was unthinkable. Dark skin was associated with rural workers. The elite wanted to look pale, a sign they didn't need to work outdoors. Women used bathing machines, wheeled cabins pulled by horses down to the water, ensuring complete privacy. The idea of getting some sun simply didn't exist. The sun was something to avoid, not something to seek. Only decades later, already in the 20th century, a tan became a symbol of status and leisure. Going to the beach was anything but relaxing. People dressed as if they were going to a formal event. Suits, long dresses, fancy hats. The goal? To be seen. They called it promenading, strolling along the boardwalk to show off social status. The more elegant the outfit, the higher your prestige. Doctors at the time prescribed sea air as medicine, so wealthy families turned the beach into a stage. Nobody went into the water dressed like that. There were bathing machines, wheeled cabins that took people out to the sea in privacy. A tan? That was for laborers. Pale skin was a symbol of the upper class. The Victorian beach was a social theater where everyone competed for attention. Did you know the English invented giant piers that weren't meant for fishing or boats? In the Victorian era, towns like Margate in 1855 and Blackpool in 1863 built these huge structures just for fun. People paid to stroll out over the sea, listen to live bands, and dance. It was basically the shopping mall of the time, but out on the water. The idea sounds crazy, but it became so popular that dozens of piers went up along the English coast. Many still exist today, all because the Victorians wanted to enjoy the ocean without getting wet. Forget this idea of the beach as some zen place to relax. In Victorian England, the sand was pure, organized chaos. Little donkeys carried kids up and down while their parents watched Punch and Judy shows, a kind of puppet theater that was pretty violent and had the kids cracking up. Street vendors shouted as they offered ice cream and fried fish wrapped in newspaper. In fact, it was around that time that fish and chips became a national craze and a symbol of the British working class. The Victorian beach worked like an open-air market by the sea, where cheap entertainment met crowds hungry for fun. You know that idea of paid vacation? The English came up with it before everyone else. The factories in northern England would shut down for a whole week, the so-called Wakes Week, and send the workers off to rest. And where did everyone go? Blackpool. The city became the working class's playground. Packed trains arrived every week, dropping thousands of families on the beach. These were people who had never seen the sea up close. Blackpool built the famous pier and the tower, copying Paris. The thing grew so much that the city put electric street lighting in before London did. Think about that. Factory workers enjoying electric lights while the capital was still using gas. Brighton, 1895. Queen Victoria hated this place. You know why? She thought there were too many of the wrong sort of people walking along the beach. The Royal Pavilion, that crazy palace with domes that looked like they came straight out of India, was built by her grandfather as a summer getaway. But Victoria sold it all off and moved to the Isle of Wight, where nobody bothered her. And you know what happened? Brighton took off. With trains arriving from London, regular working people discovered the sea. Whole families would come spend Sunday on the sand. What used to be a playground for kings became the people's beach. That wrong sort of people the Queen looked down on turned Brighton into England's first popular seaside resort. Children played in the sand, always kept under close watch. Buckets and shovels were there, but the fun had clear limits. Any behavior seen as inappropriate was corrected right away. The real goal was never to create happy memories. It was to shape character, teach discipline, and make sure the little ones absorbed society's moral values. Victorian beach. Women would enter the sea inside wooden cabins pulled by horses. No one could see their bodies. The rich stayed in areas separate from workers. Doctors prescribed sea baths as a remedy. Which fact shocked you the most? Comment down below. If you want more history like this, subscribe and turn on the bell.